Next on the agenda, we have the Fall 2021 Equity Update.
Thank you, President Johnson and trustees. We have some folks joining us from remote this evening, and Mr. Cluley is going to get them all connected. We are very excited to share with you the equity update. Thank you, trustees and community. It's great to see our team members joining us remote, and I appreciate they are attending to the work of making sure our buildings are staffed and ready to go tomorrow. So I appreciate that they're double tasking this evening. We are proud to bring a fall update to the equity work that we are doing in the district. Trustees, you recall that we were last together on May 19th for a spring update. And at that time, we shared a little bit about our 21-22 plan. And yet we're excited this evening to share more of the work that we've been doing over previous months. Our focus this year is really on building individual, team, and organizational capacity, developing that foundation of shared language and shared understanding, learning together around equity work. And as we shared back in the spring, it's really in 3 areas: transforming culture in our organization, shifting daily practice in classrooms and in schools and in our community locations, and then also ensuring that the system, because we know if systems are not adjusted, that they can be systems of oppression, and we understand that. And so our third area is really about redesigning our system so that we engage, affirm, and celebrate our students for exactly who they are and what they bring to learning, that we celebrate their unique identities, cultures, and strengths that they bring into the learning environment. And we understand that the work this year is about changing us in order to serve our students better. So we have with us this evening Ms. Dawn Linden, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Ms. Jazz Parks, Assistant Superintendent of K-12 Schools, and Dr. Roberta Hayward, Executive Director of Middle Level and K-8 Schools. They are 3 folks who work regularly deep in this work with us. We're going to look at really 3 parts, trustees, and really focus in, if you can picture, we're zooming in on what is the work this year. We really feel like that work is engaging in learning together along a teacher pathway, learning together along a leadership, principal, school leader pathway, learning together along a student pathway. So we have members who will be chatting with you. Dr. Hayward will be sharing about our student work with student voice. And then we're excited to be engaging with our parents and with our community members. So with that in mind, I believe Ms. Dawn Linden is going to share the culturally responsive framework in terms of how do we create and ensure an equitable framework for instruction, every classroom, every student, every day. Ms. Dawn Linden.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swift and President Johnson and trustees. It's our pleasure to bring this very important topic to you tonight, and it is the heart of our work. It's the heartbeat of what we do every single day. And so this is why we begin with this particular screen and sharing that equity is everything. And for us, and I'm sure for you as well, equity translates to care in really big, important ways. So let's dive right in. I'll share with you a little bit about where we've been and where we're going with our framework for equitable instruction. And in these next few screens, you're going to see a little bit of the context for the framework. And there are a few things that we'll share with you. I won't obviously read this, and I know you have access to the document. But this is really our commitment to be on the journey and to do this journey and this work together. We are all educators. We know that we are on a continuous path of growth. And we know that historically the work we have done, while it has been heartfelt and hard work, hasn't resulted in what we'd like to see. And so in this center part, it really describes the rationale and the reason for the need and the shift that we're trying to make. Together, our goal is to create spaces where students are centered, they are valued, they are significant, they are supported and challenged, and that they can access learning and they feel the ability to be their authentic and full selves in that space. And we know this is at the heart of the data that we see. And so our intentionality is to create spaces like that for each and every student, and specifically students in the student groups we list here, because we have historically underserved our English learners, our Black and Brown students, our students with exceptionalities, and our students who are experiencing economically disadvantaged status. And so here's the important part. When we are successful in this work, there will be no predictability based on those factors regarding a student's success academically in our system. And right now, that predictability is clear. And so we'll be monitoring, and you'll hear more about it as the months come. But when we think about our instruction, we'll go back to 2020 for a moment. During our pandemic year, we made, as you know, some significant shifts. And one big part of our focus was ensuring that learning was accessible to students. And so there were two big areas of focus here. And you'll see us talk often about universal design and SIOP elements. SIOP stands for Sheltered Instruction Protocols. And these are protocols particularly useful for students who are learning English, but they are useful strategies and techniques for all students. The same is true for our universal design approach to learning, is making sure that students can come to the learning regardless of their background information, regardless of their knowledge of the vocabulary, regardless of their experience with that topic. They can come to the learning from different places, be challenged, and access the learning. And so those are really important to us. And they were driving last year where we were in trying to make sure that in our online learning experience, we made sure that learning was not only accessible, but it was predictable. So students could predict where they were going. They felt comfortable in the space. They couldn't get lost. And so you're seeing here a system of color coding and predictability in lesson design so that students could stay on track. Those pieces were prescriptive, and we stepped together pretty closely last year as a teacher team. And it was the first year we implemented those teaching and learning networks, where they were co-crafting, co-designing, and using lessons that they had developed together. We listened to our teachers this coming year, and we listened to what they learned about the COVID year in 2020, 2021. One big part of their learning was this voluntary professional development pathway that we set out. We knew that another big important part of accessibility was students feeling disconnected culturally from the learning. And we wanted to be responsive. We brought in two very renowned speakers, one, Dr. Yolanda Sealy-Ruiz and Dr. Richard Milner. And together they alternated providing us with 6 sessions, ranging about 90 minutes with staff. This was voluntary for teachers, and you can see that in many cases, this happened outside of the school day or the responsibilities of teaching, and over 400 team members participated in those sessions. And what they learned coming out of that was they wanted more of it, and they wanted to engage with their colleagues more fully. And so where we are now and where we're going in 2021 and beyond is making this the work and learning of every member of the Ann Arbor Public School team. And Ms. Jazz Parks is going to talk more about this series as well as the leadership piece. So I'm going to leave that to her, but it's pretty exciting in our journey to become more culturally responsive, more affirming, and more equitable in the way we teach and engage students. On the instructional side, there are 4 design elements that we want all of our teachers to become knowledgeable about, to become strong practitioners about. And we know that this work isn't just about things we do, it's about how we think and what we know. And so this is both mindset and practice work. Already you've heard me talk about universal design on the right-hand side here, and you've heard me talk about SIAP, which is instruction for linguistic academic accommodations. On the left side of the screen, you'll see culturally affirming instruction and what we're talking about, which is active and engaged instruction. So ensuring that students are at the center and they are active in the learning. And that means both during the school day, during that robust in-person learning, and options for them to engage outside of the school day at their own pace and to reconnect with learning in ways that work best for them. So these 4 design elements are driving our work. And these represent all of the learning from last year, the listening to teachers in the TLNs, the surveying of staff about what worked, what didn't work last year, what do we need to see more of. And so what you'll see in the next screen is a release. I'll come back to that in just one second. A release of the, I hate to say it, but lockstep nature of everyone delivering similar lessons at the same time to a release to teachers to be innovative and creative, to use their expertise and to do so within a framework that helps guide us on this path to become more equitable in our instruction. So you'll see in these 4 squares that each of those 4 elements have guiding questions that we want teachers in our teaching and learning networks to think about as they're designing and crafting experiences of learning for students. We want them to consider ways to enhance, to improve, to innovate, how students engage in the learning. And so for each of these 4 elements, there are these guiding questions. We'll go through just a couple. For example, here on culturally affirming instruction, we want teachers to deeply learn about, know, and understand students' interests, their cultures, their identities, and then to find ways to incorporate and connect to those as we're teaching the content. So connecting what is known to what is new. And doing that in ways that are responsive, that show that students are at the center of the learning. And this is happening all over the Ann Arbor Public Schools right now. And so in the teaching and learning networks, they're sharing these amazing practices and ideas that are happening in our classrooms across the district. And I say this every time I talk about instruction, but I will say it again, we have the best teachers in the state in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. They are an incredible team of knowledgeable, intelligent, innovative, deeply caring individuals. And so we are trying to provide a space for them to capitalize on that, to cross-pollinate the great ideas through the learning networks, and to have a common way for folks to talk about this work. And so you can take a look at these trustees and explore the rest of the guiding questions. Many ask where they came from, so I'll scroll back up because this page on page 5 is a little bit of the key research that helped to drive the identification, not just of the guiding questions, but of the work to become more culturally affirming, to have active and engaged instruction happening in the context of 21st century learning, to incredibly improve the way we design instruction by making it universal and accessible for all students, and to keep on working on those SIAP components to make sure that language proficiency isn't a barrier to learning in ways that it has been for students. And so this document, there's a lot to it, even though it's only 5 or 6 pages, but it represents where we are in the 2021-22 school year after listening to our staff and thinking about our work and ways that we could support them. And you'll notice that it has a 2.0 at the end of this document. That is because we are in our 2nd year of revision of this document. And I think it's important that we all know that this is an evolution, because as we grow and innovate and learn and become more adept and more equity-minded and better in our practice, this document will also change and grow. So I will hand off to Ms. Jazz Parks, who will take us through some other important elements of our work.
Thank you, Ms. Linden, and good evening, trustees and community. As Ms. Linden shared, we began our professional development pathway in the spring of 2021. And so this year, this school year, our goal is to extend and deepen the learning that we did in the spring throughout this school year and beyond for all of our district staff, to really grow our mindset and practice around culturally affirming instruction and leadership. And so to this end, every member of our Ann Arbor Public Schools team, so our teachers, our school staff, our building leaders, our district staff, and we've even had some trustees who have been able to join us to engage in the culturally responsive teaching series with Dr. Celie Ruiz, who will be with us about 6 times this year. And her series is designed to help us to develop our own self-awareness as educators to ultimately ensure that we are a culturally affirming and responsive environment and district for all of our students. And so Dr. Celie Ruiz's series really grounds us in the understanding that authentic relationships, so those student to student, those student to adult and adult to adult relationships are a critical component of creating culturally affirming learning environments and spaces for our students. She also lifts up throughout her series the understanding that self-reflection and humility, she refers to it as critical humility, are critical components for us to really tap into individually and collectively in order to be able to grow around becoming more culturally affirming for our students' benefit. She also really has highlighted through all of her sessions so far that embracing a culturally responsive mindset, both kind of as individuals and collectively as a system, is really the pathway that we really need to focus on in order to make sure that all of our students and our families are honored the way that they should be here in Ann Arbor Public Schools. And in addition to that all district pathway with Dr. Celie Ruiz, our leadership council, which is more than 100 members of our AAPS school and district leaders, are engaged together with Dr. Christopher Emden, who is really working with us to, as he puts it, really recognize that it's really through knowledge of ourselves and the world around us that we are able to open our eyes to what he calls the genius that each and every student possesses. And that resonates for us because we've been talking for years here in Ann Arbor Public Schools about how it's not incumbent upon students to be different when they come into our schools in order for us to best meet their needs. Really, it's incumbent upon us individually and as a system to make sure our students are celebrated and not tolerated, if you will. And so that really resonates for us. And he grounds us in the principles around what it means to be culturally relevant leaders and culturally affirming leaders, how we as leaders can best support our teachers in creating and developing culturally affirming learning environments for students. And really importantly, a part of his series with our leaders is about how leaders can effectively incorporate students' culture, voices, and perspectives into our learning environment in our system so that they have agency. And Dr. Hayward is going to talk a little bit now about the components of the student pathway that we're developing for that student voice and that student agency.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Linden, and thank you, Ms. Parks. Good evening, trustees. Culturally responsive learning alongside students is a critical component of our work to leverage student voice and student perspective. We want our students to know their voices are valued and that they are a part of the decision-making process. We are working so that students have a greater sense of agency, which impacts and informs the system via student equity teams, student affinity groups, which include groups like BSU or Black Student Union, our LGBTQ+, Latinx groups, peer-to-peer, and others, all of which any student can participate in. Advisory lessons with themes such as pride in our differences, LGBTQ+ presentations, bully prevention, and social justice lessons. Having student groups engage with building administrators, student engagement at a national level around equity, This includes students participating in the Minority Student Achievement Network. MSAN is a national coalition of multiracial school districts that comes together to understand and eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps that persist in schools, and student voice and equity professional development for staff. Our goal is to have student equity groups in every school and to continue to implement student programs that build capacity and leverage student voice. Now back to Dr. Swift.
Thank you guys so much. It's so great to see you on Zoom. Trustees, in addition to the pathways for all staff, last Wednesday I was with Dr. Celie Ruiz, and she and I were together on the panel for a minute or so, and she looked down and there were almost 2,000 people in the session. So that pathway is really large. Then the leadership pathway and the student pathway that you heard a little bit about. In addition, we are confirming dates now, trustees, and I've shared previews of this with each of you, but we're confirming dates with Dr. Yolanda Celie Ruiz to share with the community, because we feel like it's important that this shared language and this shared understanding, that we kind of make sure that the community has that opportunity also. So we are looking at a November of 21 and a February, April, kind of 3 of those sessions. She also, I think Ms. Parks touched on it, but she also is going to conduct affinity groups. So groups, for example, staff members of color, students of color, LGBTQ staff and or students, affinity groups, to really get into how our students and our staff and our community, how they're doing, how they're feeling, how their experience is in our system. This is an activity that she does with districts. Of course, her real job is as a professor at Columbia Teachers College, but she also does this work, and we're pleased for that. So as you can see, trustees, we didn't bring a big formal plan. I do appreciate the comments of Aspire this evening and absolutely agree with every item that they're looking forward to seeing in the plan, and we absolutely have those things in our mind as well. But our focus first this year is on this 21-22 phase, and I put it in your document, trustees, just written out, but to continue our learning together. Really, the areas of study are racial literacy. That does include bias training, archaeology of the self, and equitable leadership practices. And we're excited to engage with our own Ann Arbor Public Schools team members, then also to engage with students and student groups across the district, across the community, to engage with parent and community groups. So we're really excited. In fact, I got an invitation yesterday, trustees, from our Arab American parent support group. So we'll be with our parent support groups and we're having this discussion about their experiences, about our thinking and moving forward with our learning together. And from those conversations, trustees, we're looking at a district equity advisory group that would be representative of all of those voices: parent, community, students, staff. And that's a very exciting thing. We want to spend these next weeks and months engaged in this learning, conversation, engagement together. We want to ensure that all voices are heard, and we want to talk about how will we measure success in equity, because everybody may measure that differently. We want to share together. We're not coming into this with any preconceived notions. We want to talk to all of these voices and see what is next. So trustees, we'll look forward. We'll continue to invite you to all of the sessions. I know that Many of you work full time, so it's not always possible to jump on a Zoom in the middle of the day, but there will be evening times also. We will continue to invite you to those sessions. We look forward to engaging with people. We'd like to come back in the spring and share with you what we've heard from our community, what we've heard from our staff, and really next steps on clarifying components of a plan and how we plan to move forward 22, 23, and beyond. So listening, learning, developing shared language, engagement, those are kind of the 4 cornerstones of these next few months of the winter. So with that, team, did I leave anything out that you thought I should have included? All right, great. I really appreciate these 3 leaders who have driven this work at the district level. But I also want to give a shout out, trustees. We have teachers across this district, support staff, and building leaders who are deeply committed to this work. I feel a real momentum behind making change in our system, in ourselves, in our teams, and in our system so that children are celebrated for who they are and they are welcome, and that we're dismantling systems that are barriers for children and those who are traditionally have been underserved.